Well, of course, I was War Cabinet staff, not number 10 staff. So I'd been working upstairs, but there was only one entrance downstairs, and we had to ring a bell. We didn't even know what downstairs was until we got there. And so the way in which I normally met him or saw him would be in the corridor, because we had to use the same corridors, and he would always stop and speak and say good morning or good afternoon. We'd say good morning, Mr. Churchill, morning, Prime Minister. And certainly the civilians, I think, found him very affable. I know people have got other ideas and other experiences, but we found him very affable indeed. And if there'd been a raid, he'd probably say, was your house affected? How are your family? Not a long conversation, but he always spoke, whereas most of the others walked straight past without saying anything.
And am I right in saying you had a movie night with him one time, that there was a group of you that...
Yes, he had one of the rooms set up as a sort of cinema, and very, very ordinary, not very grand. And the word went round that he was going to watch a film that night, which I believe he loved doing, and would any of us like to join him? Yeah. So some of us thought we would. We'd rather have gone to bed, really, I think. It was probably about 12 o'clock at night. Oh, gosh. And we were doing a 24-hour shift. Oh, so, you know, it's quite a long day, and then going to be on duty the next day. However, we sat and we waited, and we waited. And then all of a sudden, the door burst open, and in he strode in his pyjamas and dressing gown, cigar in one hand, glass in the other, and shouted out something like, "Winnie's here, let it roll."
No way.
I've no idea what the film was about. I can't remember that.
He used to, during the air raids, he would go up on the roof, wouldn't he?
Indeed, I've heard that. In fact, somebody told me who was a private detective looking after him, that he was terribly difficult to keep track of. And the story goes that when he was going to bed and his aide was sort of saying goodnight, he'd make sure you tell Mrs. Churchill that I've gone to bed down here, because he hated sleeping down there. But if there was something going on, of course, the minute the aide had gone out of the room, he was out of his bed and whipped upstairs.
And off he'd go.
And standing on the roof.
Well, I gather, yes. I mean, I wasn't actually there with him on the roof, but that's what I gather he did. He was desperate about the Houses of Parliament, and he wanted to be where the action was, I think. You know, he'd been a man of war really all his life, hadn't he?
And you wrote the battle list for D-Day. I imagine that sort of lead up to that time must have been an incredibly tense time down there.
Yes, we were right in the hub, of course, downstairs. Upstairs it had been rather boring, committee reports and things like that. And downstairs, suddenly, there we were in the midst. We were in the Joint Planning Secretariat, about 8 of us. So the work was immediate, and we did type up all sorts of things, but we did type up the orders for D-Day, but where they came from and where they went to, you never knew, because the work all came into a supervisor, was handed out, double-checked, thank goodness, otherwise I don't know where we'd have sent them. You know, if we'd made a typing error and they'd gone to Spain.
Oh, gosh.
No, that really would have been a mistake. Thankfully, you didn't do any of that. And so, when the war came to its conclusion, where were you the moment that you knew that it had finished?
Well, I was working. We were given the day off afterwards, I think, or we'd been told that we'd have the day off when the news broke. But in actual fact, because it got sort of into the habit of going to work, I actually turned up at the War Cabinet offices, and one of the people on duty, one of the staff, said, "Don't know what you're doing here." I expect he was rather cross that he'd got to be in. So I then suddenly realised I shouldn't have gone to work that day. I had to go back the next day, of course. But my parents were staying with an aunt with whom I was sharing a flat in those days, and they'd gone to the palace in the hopes of seeing something. And I miraculously found them in the Mall. Wow. And there we were outside Buckingham Palace all shouting. And it's amazing when you think of the controls there are today, and the barriers and the police and guns and all that sort of thing. And the whole of the Mall was just seething with thousands of people.
One of the trips you took with I think it was whether Churchill went with you at the time, was to the Chancellery, to Hitler's bombed office, bombed bunker. And you've brought in a couple of pieces here, which his desk, which had been destroyed, the big hole in the roof. Yes. And these are bits of Hitler's desk.
So I understand. That's why we all took them. We were in the Chancellery. I went with a Colonel Norman who'd lived there before the war and wanted to find if his flat was still standing. So he took us round 1 or 2 places first. And we went into the Chancellery, always under the supervision of the Russians, of course, but we did manage to pick a few bits up. I think lots of people probably did that.